You know that feeling? When you've aced a grammar test, you know all the rules, but then you freeze up trying to actually order a coffee in a new language? Yeah. That gap between knowing the language and using it, that's exactly what text-based instruction is all about. It's a complete shift in focus, moving away from isolated words and rules to the real-world stuff we use every single day. You know, conversations, emails, even the instructions on a recipe.
So how are we going to break this down? Well, first up, we'll get a clear definition of what text-based instruction, or TBI, actually is. Then we're going to explore the core building blocks, what we mean by texts and genres. After that, we'll actually step inside a classroom to see how this all works in practice. And finally, we'll zoom out and look at the whole picture, the strengths, and yeah, some of the critiques too.
All right, let's get right into it. What exactly is this thing we call text-based instruction?
Okay, think about the last email you sent. You didn't just throw a bunch of words together, did you? Of course not. You thought about who you were writing to, what you wanted to say, the right tone to use. That right there is the heart of TBI. It's about moving past just memorizing vocab lists and grammar drills, and instead looking at how whole texts, whether it's a quick chat with a friend or a formal business report, actually work in real life. It's about understanding the entire communication package.
Now, TBI isn't just a cool idea. It's a really practical framework that's built on 4 key principles. First, you explicitly teach how texts are put together. Then, and this is crucial, you connect those texts to their real-world social context. From there, your lessons are actually built around these whole pieces of communication, not just bits and pieces. And finally, you give students guided practice so they can eventually communicate meaningfully on their own.
So, to really get a handle on TBI, we need to understand its 2 main building blocks, texts and genres. Seriously, these 2 concepts are at the absolute center of how this whole approach sees language.
This quote from the linguist M.A.K. Halliday, it just nails the whole spirit of TBI, doesn't it? It reminds us that language isn't just a static collection of words sitting in a dictionary. It's alive. It's this dynamic tool we use to connect with people and create meaning together. And that social part is exactly what TBI is all about.
Okay, here's where we get into a really important distinction, the difference between a text and a genre. A text is a specific thing, like the exact words you say when you're ordering a pizza on the phone. The genre, on the other hand, is the bigger category it fits into, like making a phone order, which kinda has its own unwritten rules and expectations, right? TBI is all about teaching learners how to navigate both. And just take a look at this. This gives you a little taste of the huge variety of genres we all deal with every single day. From listening to a sports game to reading a cookbook, each one of these things requires a totally different set of language skills. The whole point of TBI is to get learners ready for this incredibly rich and diverse world of communication. And if we zoom in a little closer, within all those genres, we find these common text types, and each one has a very specific job to do. For instance, a recount is all about telling a story that happened in the past, while an exposition is about arguing a point. Getting a handle on these patterns gives learners a super powerful toolkit for communicating effectively.
Okay, so we've got the theory down. That's great. But now for the big question. What does TBI actually look like when you walk into a classroom? How does all this translate into actual teaching?
Well, in a TBI classroom, the teacher is way more of a coach than a lecturer. Their job is to find authentic texts that are actually relevant to the students' lives, show them how to break those texts down, and then provide just enough support, what we call scaffolding, to help students start building their own communication skills piece by piece.
And the learners? Well, they're definitely not just sitting back and passively taking notes. No way. They are super active participants. They're analyzing models, they're working together with their classmates, and they're always aiming for that goal of being able to create their own texts, all on their own, using the examples as their guide.
And this right here, this is the engine of TBI. It's this learning cycle, a step-by-step process that really guides students from just understanding something to actually creating it themselves. You start by building the context. Then, you model and deconstruct a text. Next, and this is a fun part, the whole class builds a new text together. And finally, students go off and create their own, independently. This slow, steady release of responsibility is so key for building both their skills and their confidence. So, we've dug into what TBI is and how it works. Now, it's time to kind of zoom out and look at the whole landscape. What are the real strengths of this approach? And, to be fair, what are some of the common criticisms?
So the number one strength of TBI is its real-world relevance. It's all about preparing students for the kind of communication they're actually going to need.
Now, on the flip side, some critics worry that if you focus too much on models, you might accidentally squeeze out some individual creativity. And there's a risk for sure that the learning cycle could get a bit repetitive if you apply it too rigidly. That's why good teachers know it's a flexible tool. You adapt it, and you always encourage students to find their own voice within those structures.
And all of this brings us back to the fundamental question that TBI really forces us to ask. It challenges us to stop looking at language as just a pile of parts to be dissected, and instead to see it as what it is, a living, breathing tool we use to connect with each other. So what really happens when we shift our focus from just knowing the rules to truly understanding how to use them to create meaning? Now that is a powerful question that TBI leaves us to think about.